Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We're going to have Alan Dershowitz with us in the first hour. He's going to actually be with us a little bit later in the second hour, and we are going to be talking about his new book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. How can we stop Iran from getting nukes? And so we're going to spend some time talking about that. And I might just mention that if you want to kind of read ahead, first of all, of course, he has this new ebook out. It's also available in paperback, but again, he's concluded, and I'm starting to conclude this as well. If you want to get a book out quickly, especially if it's on a contemporary issue, putting it out as an ebook or as a Kindle is a much more effective way to do so. But we've also posted a couple of articles, one from USA Today, which he said, Mr. Obama, your Iran deal will fall apart, and then one that appeared in Newsweek of the case against the Iran deal. So we will probably get to that a little bit later in the program, and we caught him off guard. He did not know the interview was going to be right now, and we'll just get him on a little bit later, and that will work out just fine. Just rarely do I tell you about the behind-the-scenes changes, but that's one of those that I thought I'd let you know about. And so this gives us some time in the first hour here to really focus on a couple of issues. We've posted a couple of articles that we will get to, but one that is left over from yesterday I thought we might talk about for just a moment, and that is the ongoing challenge of these voter ID laws. Robert Knight has written a very good piece about this, another attack on election reform. And the reason I wanted to use it is I know we have a number of listeners in Rhode Island, and your state right now is really kind of the center of controversy. And it's a good illustration as to why many of the arguments being used right now by those who oppose voter ID laws don't make any sense. And so I'm going to, for those of you in the other 40-plus states that aren't in Rhode Island, going to take you to Rhode Island for just a minute, because it's really intriguing, and I think it illustrates only so well why these arguments that are used don't make any sense. Robert Knight says, although people in the nation's smallest state can obtain photo voter ID with ease, the American Civil Liberties Union says that requiring an ID in order to vote is a hardship. And so he goes through some of the arguments that we've heard before. You know, how do we make it possible for an individual to get a photo ID? If you're disabled, if you're a student, if you're elderly, if you're the poor. And so that is certainly one of the issues that is put on the table. The other is that actually, if you really want to be honest, voter ID is just an attempt by majority individuals to prevent minority vote. It's a good example of some kind of voter suppression, oftentimes initiated by the Republicans. And in the case of Rhode Island, it is really fairly easy to set aside those two arguments. And so let me kind of work our way through this for just a minute. And that is, he says, the group's Rhode Island chapter has demanded the end of the photo voter ID law that a solidly Democratic legislature enacted in 2011. By the way, I might mention that the sponsor of this in the Senate was an African-American Democrat, so it kind of sets aside that second argument. But anyway, we'll leave that alone. And he goes on in the article to talk about the fact that you had courts striking down laws in Arkansas, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Texas. But at the same time, courts sometimes have upheld these laws in Georgia, Tennessee, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And he says in 2008, the U.S. Supreme Court upheld Indiana's photo voter ID law, which has been a model for other states. North Carolina's voter ID law which also curbs early voting and ends out of precinct voting and same-day registration, went to trial in late July in a federal court. So some of you that are in some of these states right now recognize that those are ongoing battles. But he goes on to say that the charge to actually suppress the vote of minorities, the elderly, the young, and disabled is equally absurd in Rhode Island, where accommodations for people to get a free ID are impressive. Look at this list. It's pretty amazing. If you're in Rhode Island, if you're a Rhode Islander, and you don't have an ID, you really, he says, can't blame the state government, which outreach program even includes a mobile phone app, which gives the wealth of voter information to anybody that would like to vote. It even gives GPS directions to the nearest polling place. And what do you need to actually get a photo ID? Well, it includes anything like, and not limited to just these, an employer ID card, an ID card provided by a commercial establishment, a credit card, a debit card, a military ID card, a student ID card, a health club ID card, an insurance plan ID card, or a public housing ID card. Okay, even if you don't have one of those, you can still have about one of 19 other items, such as a utility bill, a bank statement, vehicle registration, senior citizen or disabled discount cards, or even a prescription drug invoice. And so you can see that it has made it extremely easy for people to register and get a photo ID. But you say, okay, well, they got to still fill it out. That's true. And in Rhode Island, you can either fill out the Rhode Island voter registration form, or you can use the National Voter Registration Form, and you can do that in person, or you can do that by mail. And it also allows you to enable someone else with your help to actually do that. Doesn't really sound like voter suppression, does it? And it does, I think, illustrate again how most individuals have a great opportunity for being able to really, in a sense, be part of the 21st century. Because, if you want to talk about this, there are just a lot of things you cannot do with a photo if you do not have a photo ID. That includes such things as getting on an airplane, cashing a check, in many cases buying a beer. It used to be you needed a photo ID to rent a video, all sorts of things like this. And so, again, that is one of the issues. And then he goes back and then takes on that second point that I mentioned, and that is Democrats control both legislatures in Rhode Island. The voter ID bill was actually introduced in the Senate by an African-American Democrat, co-sponsored in the House by members from both parties, and signed by independent Governor Lincoln Chafee, who actually now is pretty much running on the Democratic side. And so you really, in a sense, have those two arguments that have been made, and both of them pretty easily set aside. So I thought I'd just mention that real quickly, because I do believe, as one of our callers mentioned yesterday, there is going to be maybe some voter shenanigans, some inappropriate, unorthodox kinds of things maybe done even during this election. And so one of the ways to prevent voter fraud from taking place, one of the ways to enhance election reform, is to address these issues of photo voter IDs. If you'd like to join us on that point, that's just one that I'm going to cover, but I thought I'd cover it quickly since we did not get to it yesterday. Feel free to give us a call, 1-800-351-1212. Still, those of you listening that are in some of those states where the courts have upheld it, consider yourself fortunate that you live in Georgia or Tennessee or Ohio or Wisconsin. The sad reality is for some of you that are listening in states like Arkansas, Missouri, Pennsylvania, and Texas, court ruled against it, and it just doesn't make any sense, because the two most powerful arguments against having a photo voter ID, I think, are easily dismissed when we look at exactly what happened in Rhode Island. And, of course, they have had that upheld as well. Those of you in North Carolina will see what the courts have to say, but it just is amazing to me that something as simple as having a photo ID so that you can vote is as controversial as it's become. If you agree with me and have some questions about that or some comments, 1-800-351-1212. We'll come back and talk about a little of the fallout from Donald Trump releasing his position paper on immigration and some of the comments that many of you have about him or other candidates. And then we'll move on to some very important kind of broad questions about morality. All that coming up right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when I was growing up, there were lots of talk about the new morality, and while that was true in the 1960s and 70s, ushering in a new morality, there is growing evidence that the most significant shift in moral attitudes is taking place right now. A study by the Barna Group confirms what I've been seeing among young people. Put simply, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be engaged in immoral behavior. The survey looks at the behavior of 4 age groups: elders who are over the age of 62, boomers who are 44 to 62, busters who are 25 to 43, and mosaics who are 18 to 24. If you look at any immoral or questionable behavior, the percentage of those participating in those behaviors increases as you move from old to young. This would include such behaviors as watching pornography, using profanity in public, gambling, illicit sexual encounters, and getting drunk. George Bonner says we are witnessing the development and acceptance of a new moral code in America. He explains that mosaics have little exposure to traditional moral teaching and limited accountability for such behavior. The moral code began to disintegrate when the generation before them, the baby busters, pushed the limits that had been challenged by their parents, the baby boomers. You know, for years I've been saying that these 2 major shifts in morality took place for different reasons. When many baby boomers rejected traditional morality in the 1960s and 70s, they were doing it consciously. They knew they were crossing a line. But when the current generation engages in these behaviors, often they're not even aware that they are crossing a line. Most of them don't even know where the lines for traditional morality are. This survey should be an encouragement to both parents and youth leaders to take the time to instruct the current generation in biblical morality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Prayer is a powerful weapon. From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room in theaters August 28. Rated PG. More information at warroomthemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
If you'd like to join a conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Talking a little bit about the idea of a voter photo ID. And if you'd like to join our conversation on that, 1-800-351-1212. Can talk a little bit about also the reaction to Donald Trump's release of his immigration position paper. My commentary today on the new morality, and also we've posted an article by Dennis Prager sort of paralleling some of the things I've written on how do you know what's right and wrong. So a lot of things to talk about here today, but let's take a phone call. Let's make sure I say this name right. I think it's Lorelda in Texas, KCTA. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Mr. A, for being there. I was telling the lady that answered, I couldn't remember the exact adjective that you used that another caller was using for our voter ID.
Uh-huh.
The first thing that came to my mind was, have they forgotten what a privilege it is? And there's nothing inconvenient about proving that I'm an American, not necessarily Republican, Democrat, independent, whatever, but that I'm an American and I have the right to vote.
I think so. There are a couple of issues. Number one, there are individuals that we have in this country, while we're talking about immigration, that have come here legally and have gone through all the process so that they can be legal citizens of the United States so they can vote. Then there are others who have come here illegally and have, in some cases, forged documents so that their vote could actually counteract your or my vote. And then, of course, you've had individuals that have committed crimes like a felony that have lost the right to vote. So if that doesn't make the case for the fact that voting is a privilege, it's an opportunity which we extend to anyone. And I'm all about giving people access to all the information necessary and access to the polls, but also don't force people that don't take it as seriously as you and I do. And it is a privilege, and it is an opportunity. And just think of how few people around the world enjoy the kind of opportunity that we will have a year from now to elect 33 members of the United States Senate, 435 members of the House of Representatives, and a new president and a new vice president. That is power that most people in Western history could never have imagined. So I think we should recognize it's a very important privilege that we should take seriously.
Am I still with you?
You are.
Yes, sir. I grew up with that down here at the tip of Texas with everything, a lot that involves, I'll just use the broad term and say illegals or aliens. And I came to understand at an early age that there had to be a process. And I thought, what happened to that process where there were certain things that they had to learn and do? Because I catch myself still, as a substitute teacher especially, reminding others that this is an English-speaking country. You know, I said, that's one of the privileges, too.
Sure.
I don't go to that other country and expect them to speak my language. It's wonderful if they do, but I can't expect it. Nor can I expect that person that hasn't learned a little more about the American way to think they're entitled to all the privileges that I am as an American.
Well, again, I've talked about this on the program. Let me pick up on that because I did a commentary a while back where there are some states, and let's give high praise to Wisconsin, a few other places that are now doing this, to say that they are requiring, before you graduate from high school, you have to pass the citizenship test, because they were beginning to find that those naturalized citizens, those who came here from Germany or South Africa or Canada or the UK, or maybe they came from Vietnam or Laos or South Korea, wherever they might have come, they actually knew more about our history than those who were born here. And so I thought that was very helpful. Now, you ask the other question, why is it we don't require some kind of knowledge? I think that made some sense. The problem is it was completely abused in the South because of the Jim Crow laws. And because they used this to prevent African Americans from voting and ask very difficult questions of African Americans but not of others, and use that to prevent them from voting, I don't know that we'll ever be able to implement that again. But candidly, I'd like at least, if we could do it, I know it will not happen, but I'd like to at least have people who step into the voting booth know, for example, you know, how long a president serves, how long they can serve, how many terms, just a little bit about the Senate and the Congress and maybe their state legislature, because they're voting for those individuals, and sometimes they're voting with a tremendous amount of ignorance. So I wish we could do that, but I recognize that our sorry history will prevent us from requiring any kind of voter education or voter requirement for a level of education before somebody casts his or her vote.
That's true, Mr. A. And I guess because I've been out of high school for almost 50 years, I can show my embarrassment over the phone. Anyway, we had to take civics, and so
yes, you
did learn a little bit, you know, stuff that you were supposedly already knew, but I was amazed at how many didn't. And I catch myself reminding who is what, and, you know, even locally, I said locally, state, federal, you know, I try to keep all that in mind. I don't want to take up more time, but it truly is a privilege, and I don't want us to lose it because we're afraid to show that we are American.
Well, thank you for a wonderful comment. I appreciate you calling in today.
All right, sir. Thank you for being there.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Some of you might also say, well, how important is it that we have voter integrity? Well, again, it gets back to something we've talked about on this program before, and every once in a while I publish another column on close elections. I've got quite a collection now of some very close elections, but I'll just mention two real quickly because I think it illustrates, again, the importance of one vote. Don't let anybody say that one vote doesn't matter. One of the best examples I've used over the years is a friend by the name of Penny Pullen. And we used to do broadcasts through the Moody Broadcasting Network, and she was a state representative in Illinois. Well, when it came time for her primary, she actually had something that had never happened in the history of Illinois politics, and that is it was a complete tie. And so as a result, they weren't quite sure what to do, so eventually they decided that they would just have to flip a coin. So Penny Pullen and her opponent went into the office of Judge Francis Barth, and he flipped a coin, and she lost. Now here's the rest of the story. That Sunday, she went to church, and she met almost 30 different people that came up and said, "Oh, Penny, if I'd known it was so close, or it was going to be close, I would have voted, but, I got home late, and I didn't bother to go to the polls." Or some of them said, "Well, I was out of town, I didn't get an absentee ballot." If just one of the people in her church had voted for her, she would not have lost on a coin toss. Well, there's a couple others, and one that I love to use since I also have listeners in Ohio. That's the story in Ohio of William Crawford and Gene Miller, and they both received identical votes in that election. Now, again, it was more like a city council case, but still, doesn't happen very often. But here again, a tie election. This one was even closer to home because it turns out that William Crawford has two sons, and one of his sons, Jim, lives across the street from him. His other son, Andy, was a college student who lived at home, and neither Jim nor Andy voted for their dad. So again, if Dad had gotten a vote from one of his sons, it wouldn't have been a tie election. If you need any more evidence, there are many others online of some very close elections, sometimes decided by one vote. And so, again, this is why I think this issue of election reform is a very significant concern. Well, just before we take a break, again, we've seen quite a bit of reaction to Donald Trump's immigration reform package, which, again, really focuses on three very simple principles. Number one, a nation without borders is not a nation. And so he is proposing that we will build an impenetrable wall, I should say, and that Mexico would pay for it. Number two, that a nation without laws is not a nation, and that is to really defend the Constitution of the United States and also begin to challenge even this idea of birthright citizenship, which he's been talking about, the so-called anchor babies. And then number three, a nation that does not serve its own citizens is not a nation, and that is to begin to challenge, as he would want to do, the various trade deals that have been enacted, some of the trades treaties that are certainly not helping American workers, and at the same time to put Americans first when it comes to some of the job opportunities. So that has certainly been an issue. And of course, yesterday we had a conversation about whether or not political experience is necessary for an individual who will serve in the presidency. So far, the American people have made it pretty clear that if you look at the polls coming out, the top five individuals are three who have never served in political office: Donald Trump, Ben Carson, and Carly Fiorina, and then two others who are relatively young senators, Ted Cruz and Marco Rubio. If that isn't good evidence of the American people, at least on the Republican side, casting a vote against the Republican establishment and business and government as usual, I don't know what is. If you'd like to join us on that comment and that topic, we certainly will take some of your comments and questions as well. 1-800-351-1212. We'll talk about that, but also get into this issue of morality. How do we make decisions about right and wrong? I have some things to say about that. So does Dennis Prager. We'll cover those issues right after this.
What can you get for $5? In most cases, you can't even get a value meal at a fast food restaurant. But I'll tell you one thing $5 can do. If every listener to Point of View sent just $5 this week, believe it or not, and someone here did the math, Point of View could pay the bills for the next 3 years. That's what the number said. $5, 3 years. That's how many of you there are and how little it takes to keep us going. The problem is, most of our listeners have never contributed. Never. To make up for those who don't, others give large gifts, hundreds, even thousands, or monthly donations of $30, $65, $100. I don't know what you can do, but I encourage you to do what you can today, even if that's $5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.org. pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Thank you for doing your part for Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Put just a couple of issues on the table so far. And don't forget, we're going to be talking with Alan Dershowitz now in the second hour. He was going to be with us in the first hour. His new book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran, How We Can Stop Iran from Getting Nukes. But I want to take some of your phone calls first, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go first to Georgia, WLPE. Olympia, you have the floor. What would you like to share?
Oh, hi, Kerby. I wanted to know that, I wanted to make it known that I noticed the chat about Donald Trump, what he wants to do with the borders and American economy and so on. And Dr. Carson was mentioned as simply being one of the top three contenders. Dr. Carson has accomplished what very few Americans have accomplished, and he's not driven by greed. He's not driven by his ego. He is not driven by power. He's driven by restoring America a love for the Constitution and a love for the Lord. And he said as long as the Lord keeps opening the doors, he'll walk through them. And I really would like for the Christian media in particular to focus more on Dr. Carson. We are praying for him all over the world and in groups on Facebook, and has more followers than any of the other candidates put together. And the other two younger senators have political ties. It's obvious, that America is really tired of political roots.
Sure seems to be.
People who are, and the majority of them are lobbyists. If not, then their family members are lobbyists, or they receive funds from Planned Parenthood and so on. So I'm really... I'm confident that when I say this, I speak for most of us in that we are hungry for the Christian media, for God's people to speak and promote Dr. Carson much more so than other people who are very loud, but only as of late.
Yes, and one of my difficulties is it was much easier to get Dr. Carson on this program before he was a presidential candidate. It's become very difficult now because I've interviewed him on many of those books. I've shared a platform with him. And Olympia, let me just add to what you've said. I mean, I've sometimes said that if you have a group of individuals and Dr. Carson walks into the room, he's the smartest guy in the room. I don't even need to go and check.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's such a brilliant man and such a man of integrity. And let me just mention real quickly, since he's in the news the other day, he was getting criticized. I want to defend him on this point. The other day on Fox News, he made a statement, which we've said here as well, and it's like, this isn't even controversial, but he made the statement that Planned Parenthood puts, quote, most of their clinics in black neighborhoods, quote, so they can control that population. And everybody went, oh, you can't say that. Well, what I have in front of me here, and I may see if we can post it on the website here, is a map that was created of where the various Planned Parenthood clinics are. And then, interestingly enough, it has a red dot if it's close to a Hispanic or Latino neighborhood, and a blue dot if it's close to an African American neighborhood. And I'll show this to the people in the camera here that might want to see it. You can see that the red and the blue dots are everywhere. And so here is a statement that he made that was it's not even controversial. He said that on the program. We've said it on the program. But because you say it in the mainstream media, he has, well, somebody said, okay, so if you go to protectingblacklives.org, you can see this in its entirety. But we will maybe post it on our Facebook page. Matter of fact, the other day I had one, was another map, and that was one that showed all the various government health clinics that exist in the country compared to the few Planned Parenthood clinics. And, of course, these government health clinics don't do abortion. Planned Parenthood does. So anyway, there's one more case where I hope just in a short time I, as well as the people that at protectingblacklives.org, could defend some of the statements that Ben Carson made, Dr. Ben Carson. So we'd love to get him on the show, and he has an invitation anytime. Consider him at least a good friend in the sense of the broadest sense of the word, because I don't know him that well, but I've met him and his wife, and certainly have been at different events with him and have had him on the program, and would love to have him on again.
Well, he definitely speaks truth. What he said about the location of these places has been statistically documented from before he ever said a word about it publicly. So
I know some of these things are so controversial. It's like, really, this is not even open for a discussion or debate. But we'll see if we can put some of those maps up there, and then you can see for yourself. But Olympia, thank you for calling. I got some others that want to weigh in, so let's see if we can give a few more of you a chance to join that conversation on the Good News Network. Daniel, what would you like to say?
Yes, sir. I'd like to see Dr. Ben Carson up there because we've had everybody else. Now we need a brain surgeon up there. Somebody knows what to do.
Somebody knows about brains, and somebody has half a brain. And I loved his line the other day.
Yeah.
You know, the one question that I would have for Dr. Carson is, okay, let's face it, you don't know as much about the political scene. He's bright, and he's a quick study. I hope that if I were to say, well, can you name the 15 cabinet offices, he would be able to do so. I don't know that he'd be able to name all the cabinet officers, but so the key to him is to explain real early on that if I'm elected, I recognize that I want to bring other very smart, very good people with lots of integrity, with a sound Christian philosophy into the government, because he certainly is going to be at the top of that. But if you have the right people in the Department of Health and Human Services and Homeland Security and the State Department and the Defense Department and places like that, then the government will run well. Nobody expects Ronald Reagan, for example, to know everything about government. But one thing that he figured out very early on is that he was going to have a few priorities, and he's going to try to put the best people in those positions to enact his philosophy. And Ben Carson's going to have to make it real clear as to what those people are, what kind of credentials they have, and where he's going to get them from, because obviously this running the federal government, it's not a one-man show. So that's one of the questions I'd love to ask him if he'd ever come on the program with us. And I suspect as they get closer to the caucuses, we're going to have all sorts of people wanting to sit in this table and talk with us, and that'll give you a chance to chat with them as well.
All right.
Well, thank you for calling. Let me take a few more phone calls real quickly. Let's go to Ricky in Louisiana, WPAD. What would you like to share?
Thank you. I want to mention out of all the candidates, there's only one that has never wavered and never waffled. And his stand has always been the same, consistent with biblical and constitutional principles. As much as I like Dr. Ben Carson, you know, he's wavered on the Second Amendment. He said some Americans should have guns, others shouldn't have guns. And then when he said if a woman gets raped, she should be getting the RU4 pill, which is abortion pill.
I saw that.
So he wavered on that.
Yeah.
And then, you know, homosexual, he said, this is what I believe. And then after that, he took so much flack. He shut up and mum. If you ask him a question about same-sex marriage, he refused to answer. So it's like you don't have the backbone that you really need to turn this country around. Even though I like the guy, don't get me wrong. There's only one that has the backbone that's never wavered on anything, constitutional or biblical, and that's Ted Cruz. That guy is who you want for the president, because he would definitely turn him in. And he's very strong on the Second Amendment. He's anti-abortion, anti-same-sex marriage, and he's been consistent. He's never, ever wavered at all. And you want somebody that's consistent, so you know their track record is going to be exactly the same when they get to the White House. Everybody else kind of flip-flops around depending on the political wind, but not Ted Cruz. He's solid as a rock, and that's the guy you really want leading this country. Somebody that's not going to waver, that can take the flack and just shove it off and don't even bother him at all.
Might just mention that we've had Ted Cruz on the program. We've also had his father, Rafael Cruz, who's about as strong as his son. So that is the case. Let me add two things about Ted Cruz that you mentioned, because behind the scenes there are some things that are happening that are turning out to be very positive for him, apart from all the things you just mentioned. And one behind the scenes is that he's been able to raise a very significant amount of money. And so he is going to be able to compete. This is, of course, the difficulty that the Ben Carsons and the Rick Santorums and the Mike Huckabee, some of the other Christians, are having. They have not been able to raise the money. Ted Cruz has, which brings me to my second point. He's raised a lot of that money by simply telling the various big donors that I'm not going to spend the money the way these other people have. We're not going to have these expensive junkets where everybody gets on a campaign plane and flies and spend your money, thousands and sometimes tens of thousands of dollars for one event. And we're chewing through hundreds of thousands of dollars every few weeks. We're going to run a very different kind of campaign. And all of a sudden, some of these big donors say, yeah, I mean, we were not impressed at all with the way in which Mitt Romney spent his money and the way in which he ran his campaign. So this is another aspect that you have to pay attention to. Sad to say, but if you don't have the money, you aren't going to be able to have the staff. And if you don't have the staff and the money and you don't have the creative out there, you're not going to be able to answer the attack ads that are going to come. I don't think Hillary Clinton's going to be the nominee, but if it's from Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden or whoever, those are going to be important issues as well. So that's something else in the favor of Ted Cruz. But again, I'll give him an opportunity to sit in this chair as well, and you can ask him questions and get to know him better as well. We're going to take a break. I'll take a few more phone calls right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's head out to Kentucky this time. WYGE. Brenda, you have the floor. What would you like to share with us?
Hello. I was interested to hear your last caller because I don't have commercial television, only PBS, you know. So I was glad, but I don't get to see Ben Carson too much. But I'm 71 years old, and for the first time in my life, I sent a campaign donation to the Ben. And so I'd like to know more about him. But I was just, about this abortion thing. My sister had an abortion, and it just breaks my heart to think that her baby's body organs could be out there somewhere, you know. And I just thank God, that you're all speaking out against abortion.
Well, we are, and again, I would hope that would not be the case, because one of the things that we hear is that they are supposed to get consent, although these most recent Planned Parenthood pieces that have come out have actually, interestingly enough, shown that sometimes they don't get consent. And I've said before that one of the things I think is happening with these various videos that come from the Center for Medical Progress is it's really forcing the American people to see this for the first time. A while back, I did a commentary earlier this month in which I quoted from John Smirek, because his father was actually with General Patton when they went into the concentration camps, and he was so horrified by this. John Smirek's father noticed that Patton went back into the town, and what they did was they rounded up all the German citizens, took them into the concentration camps, and forced them to see the horror up close and personal. And I really believe that the Center for Medical Progress today is forcing the American people, some of these politicians that have wanted to deny this, and even the media that's been complicit in this, to really have to force them to look at these medical waste bins and these organ markets and things like that, because indeed there has been a lot that has been going on. And of course, we just mentioned a minute ago this kind of disinformation campaign saying, well, you know, after all, Planned Parenthood is doing a lot of good, and I think Ben Carson did a good job of showing that they target black neighborhoods, and also that they say, well, not much of what Planned Parenthood does is about abortion. Oh, yeah? 94% of Planned Parenthood's pregnancy services came from abortions, and almost all of their annual reports lately have shown that abortions are on the rise and non-abortion services are on the decline. So we're learning a lot more about this, Brenda, and that's a good reason to pay attention in this particular campaign to where the candidates stand on issues like life and marriage and religious liberty, about the economic stability and moral climate of America. Those are all, I think, very important questions to ask of our candidates. So I appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you for taking my call.
If you would like to join the conversation, we will probably have to divert most of that in the next hour to the conversation we're going to have with Alan Dershowitz, but perhaps you have some comments about the Iran deal. And for those of you that say, well, that's happening over there, it doesn't affect us. Really? Are you sure that you want Iran to get nuclear weapons? Are you convinced that this is not going to be a threat to Israel? Alan Dershowitz, who actually supported Barack Obama when he was elected, changed his mind pretty quickly when he saw how this president actually turned his back on Israel. And so we'll talk to him about that issue and why he is concerned about how this deal could be dangerous not only for Israel, but also for America. So we're going to spend some time dealing with that as well. But I thought I would mention that I did do a commentary today on the so-called new morality. And one of the things we're finding is that the younger you are, the more tolerant you are of what we might call immoral or questionable behavior. George Barna did some surveys and found that when you look at behaviors like watching pornography, using profanity in public, gambling, illicit sexual encounters, getting drunk, those kinds of things, that by and large, the younger you are, the more likely you are to accept that. Here's George Barna's quote from my commentary. He said, "We are witnessing the development and acceptance of a new moral code in America." He says mosaics, or what we here call millennials, have had little exposure to traditional moral teaching and limited accountability for such behavior. The moral code began to disintegrate when the generation before them, the baby busters, pushed the limits that had been challenged by their parents, the baby boomers. And the piece that I've posted here today by Dennis Prager, interesting enough, parallels my commentary. So first of all, if you'd like to read my commentary, go to the website, pointofview.net, go to the viewpoints page, and we have an opportunity there for you to read it. Of course, we also have it on audio in case you wanted to hear it. You can also click that share button and put it on your Facebook page or your Twitter page to really get talking about this issue. But there's also a place for you to listen to the commentary as well. And then I've posted a piece by Dennis Prager, who's been on the program with us before. How do you know what's right and wrong? And what I thought was so good about this is he's been doing this series on kind of the difference between the left and the right, between liberal and progressives and conservatives. And if you think about that, if you start from the assumption of many leftists, who oftentimes tend to be disproportionately either atheist, agnostic, or no particular religious philosophy. Some might actually go to church, but they don't really consider the Bible as the foundation of their ethics. So as a result, they've got to come up with some kind of ethical norm. And so they use, as he says, a lot of subjective terms like I like or I don't like. So it's more about my kind of objective gut, you know, how I feel about it in my gut, or how subjectively I feel about it. Or I'm led by public opinion. And so if public opinion tells me that same-sex marriage is okay, then, okay, I'm okay with that. Or if the Supreme Court rules that same-sex marriage is okay, I'm okay with that. Or if the Supreme Court years ago ruled that abortion is a constitutional right, then I'm okay with that as well. And so those decisions are made not in any fixed way at all, but they're either subjective or they're subjected, if you will, to the mass of individuals, 51%, or an elite group like the Supreme Court. By contrast, if you're a conservative, especially if you're a Christian conservative and you use the Bible, you can say, well, I don't care if more than 100%, or almost 100%, I should say, of Americans believe abortion is right. I know that it's wrong because of what the Bible has to say. I don't care if we even have a majority of Americans today that same-sex marriage is okay. I recognize the Bible teaches that marriage is between one man and one woman. So he does a very good job of helping us see kind of the differences about how liberals versus conservatives, and I would even say how secular people versus religious people make moral decisions. And one of the real significant concerns, going back to my commentary, is, as George Barna said, when we talk about this younger generation, they've seen the limits pushed, but didn't even know they were crossing the line. And I've said before, and I say this in my column, that when baby boomers rejected traditional morality back in the 1960s and 70s, they were doing it consciously. They knew they were crossing a line. Today, we have a generation growing up, as he says, with limited moral teaching and less accountability, where they don't even know that they're crossing a line. And so this, I think, is going to be the great challenge for us as parents, as church leaders and others, to make a difference. So let me encourage you to, as always, visit the website, pointofview.net. We have all sorts of resources there for you. Brenda talked about those Planned Parenthood videos, and even if you don't have television, if you have a computer, you can go to our video right there, and we have shown you many of these videos so that you can see them for yourself and even pass them on to others. And so lots of great resources available for you today. I've mentioned my viewpoint section and, of course, our videos. Let me also mention that next year in May, we're going to be doing a tour of both Israel and Greece. It's a great opportunity because you can go just to Israel or just to Greece or to both. Now, the trip to Israel is even cheaper than it was when we went this time about a year ago, and that has to do with the fact that the prices of fuel have gone down and some great opportunities. And I know a lot of people have said, I'd love to go to Israel, but I can't afford it. Check it out. It may be the least expensive, but still really nice tour that you could ever do. And I hope that you would consider joining with us. So we're going both to Israel and to Greece. And if you'd like to know more, that's also on the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. Then we're going to be joined by Alan Dershowitz, his new book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. How can we stop Iran from getting nukes? We'll talk with him about that right after this.
How long have you been listening to Point of View? If this is your first day or two, you get a pass. This one isn't for you. But if you've been around a while, I have a question. Have you ever donated to support what we do? If not, why not? Maybe you really don't know. You never seriously thought about it. Well, please think about it. In fact, take action. Do it now. If you keep coming back, you obviously get something from the program. You've heard how people's lives have been transformed and energized to make a difference. And the only way that we can be here tomorrow and next month and next year is if you break that cycle and give. Please, you can likely do more, but act today and give at least $5. $5. Sure, if you can do 50, do it. If you can do 100, do that. But at least 5. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. Pointofview.net. Or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I just thank God for y'all. I listen to you every day, truly. I wanted to thank y'all for everything you do each day to inform Christian families and our community about the things we can do, and just the way you're so informative. I listen to you daily and love you guys and appreciate you so much.
God bless you, Kerby, for keeping this show so on track, and for the decades of wonderful help to this nation that Point of View has been. We're all big fans of your work, and we pray that God will just prosper it.
As a Christian, over the years that I've followed this program, I am constantly challenged to be on guard and to evaluate what's going on. And if for no other reason, to protect the caliber and the truth of your programming, I need to participate and to back your program financially to ensure that the truth stays out there for people to hear, to view, and to be a part of.
This is Point of View Radio.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Second hour, we're going to spend some time talking about this deal with Iran, and this new book is The Case Against the Deal with Iran. How can we stop Iran from getting nukes? And, of course, we have been quoting from Alan Dershowitz, but we are privileged to have him once again on the program. He is emeritus professor of Harvard Law School, an individual that has written over 30 different nonfiction works as well as novels, things like The Case for Israel, The Case for Peace, The Case for Moral Clarity, and, of course, more recently when we talked to him about those terror tunnels. This is a new book, though, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. And Professor Alan Dershowitz, always great to have you on the program.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. You know, I also have a new book coming out in about a month about the Bible.
We'd love to see that.
Abraham. It's called Abraham, the world's first, but certainly not last, Jewish lawyer. And it's about Abraham's argument with God over the sinners of Sodom and how our legal system really grew out of 5 stories of Abraham. So I know your listeners will be interested in that, but this book I was able to write in 2 weeks. Well, it took me 10 years or 2 weeks, depending on how you define it.
There are a lot of previous columns in there, so that was familiar territory.
I've been thinking about it for 10 years and writing about it, but when the deal was struck, I wrote it in 2 weeks and sent it to my publisher, and it became the #1 international relations bestseller on Kindle overnight. So people are reading it. It's influencing the congressional debate, and if you have any hesitations about the deal, I would suggest, getting the book on Kindle or in paperback and then writing to your senator and congressman, because this is a really, really bad deal for America.
I know that it is. And you start out by saying it's the greatest danger the world faces in the 21st century is an Iranian nuclear arsenal. I'm glad you said that instead of climate change, which is another topic for another day. But we've also posted, I might just say, Professor Dershowitz, your piece from Newsweek magazine, The Case Against the Iran Deal, as well as a piece from USA Today, Mr. Obama, Your Iran Deal Will Fall Apart. And, of course, we have a link to the Kindle or paperback. And, of course, I have it on my tablet right now and have been going through the military options, some of the articles that you've written in the first and second terms of President Obama, and then closing the deal. And I think it's fair to say that, as you point out early in the book, you were a supporter of the president. I mean, and I know you were a Hillary Clinton supporter, but you were a supporter of the president. Assumed that there was probably not that much difference in terms of John McCain and Barack Obama in terms of their attitude towards Israel. But as I start reading some of your articles that you wrote even in his first term, you began to have some real questions about how dedicated this president was towards Israel.
I did, and more generally about his foreign policy. I was very worried. In the Middle East and around the world, people respect power. And when America gives up its power and allows tyrannical regimes like Iran to gain more power, it has enormous implications. For example, the Palestinian Authority is now cozying up to Iran because they see Iran as the winner in this negotiation, America as the loser, Iran as the strong power in the Middle East, and America as the weakened power in the Middle East. So it has implications beyond the nuclear deal itself, and it's very, very worrisome. And I did have some doubts beginning in the first term, but I did vote for President Obama the second time around, and then it was really in his second term, and after the midterm elections particularly, that he took the military option off the table, and he said to the Iranians essentially, we'll negotiate with you as equals. And that's a big mistake for a superpower. If we had said to the Iranians right from the beginning, look, we're the superpower, you're not getting nuclear weapons. No matter how much you try, we're going to stop you from getting nuclear weapons, so don't even try. Now we have this problem of sanctions. How do we get rid of them? Well, we can get rid of them. What you have to do is permit 24/7 inspection. You have to commit to not seeking to export terrorism around the world. You have to stop calling for the extermination of Israel. You got to stop killing Americans. 1,000 Americans' deaths are attributable to Iran, and now we're giving them more money to cause more terrorist deaths of Americans. It's just a bad deal all around.
Let me just mention that, again, you can get this on Kindle, and, of course, the Terror Tunnels is a great way to get the books out quickly. And I might just mention that even though it's on the ebook, people can see the title, and it also has some dice, and that's something that runs through your book, because you're really saying that President Obama, maybe it's like Russian roulette. And, I'm not a gambling person, but even if I was, I wouldn't want to gamble with the future of the Western world with the idea that either they get nuclear weapons now or 10 years from now. And there was a time in which I thought I heard the president say that he would never let Iran get nuclear weapons. Your thoughts?
He did say that, and I have a chart in the book of the statements he made prior to his reelection and following the midterm elections. Clearly, he changed his policy. Look, he spoke to me right in the Oval Office. The back of the book, there's a picture of me and the president in the Oval Office talking about Iran. And he said to me, Alan, I don't bluff. You've known me a long time. Iran will never get nuclear weapons. And the interesting thing that nobody mentions is in the deal itself, right in the preface to the deal, the preliminary statement and general principles, it says the following, quote, Iran reaffirms that Iran will never, under any circumstances, seek to obtain, secure, or develop nuclear weapons. Why is that not binding? Why is the president not citing that? We now accept that as American policy, that you will never develop nuclear weapons, and we authorize the president to use whatever force is necessary to make you keep your word. The Iranians have made that pledge. They've also said that there's a fatwa, a religious prohibition against developing nuclear weapons. Why don't we hold them to their word? Why is our president saying that in 10 years, maybe they'll be able to be clear? We don't know what we're getting with this deal. We're buying a pig in a poke. We not only have that, but there are side deals that the president and the Secretary of State said they haven't even read. How can you sign a deal when there are side deals that you don't know what the content is? The side deals may undercut the principle of the deals themselves. Congress can't vote on this without seeing the side deals. It would be an abdication of their constitutional responsibility.
So again, I want to take a break because we have one of those mandatory breaks, and we'll come back and let's get into some of the side deals. Also, I remember you telling in the book here that you got a call from the president, but you're kind of in a busy area, so you went and talked to the president later when you got to your hotel room, and he said to you, what is the number one concern in Israel? And you said Iran. He said, okay, what's the number two one? Iran. And 3, 4, and 5. And I think you then later, of course, were able to meet with him. And as you said, in the back of the book, there's a picture of you talking to the president. So I'd love to hear some of those comments. Sure. And also, since I got a constitutional lawyer here, I want to talk about this. When is a treaty not a treaty?
That's
because
right.
if you go back there to Federalist Paper 69, I think Alexander Hamilton gave us a pretty good idea of what that might be. So we have a lot to cover. And the phones are already ringing, so I might as well open up the phones. 1-800-351-1212. All sorts of people wanting to address this. We won't get to those calls for a while because we want to hear from Alan Dershowitz first. But if you just joined us talking about his new book, it's available on Kindle or paperback, The Case Against the Deal with Iran, How Can We Stop Iran from Getting Nukes? And if you would like to have some information about that, we have it on our website, pointofview.net. I've also posted a couple of articles which I would encourage you to print out, maybe pass around, maybe post them on your Facebook page or Twitter page or do a link. Alan Dershowitz talking about the case against the Iran deal from Newsweek magazine, which is a nice kind of quick summary of some of the material in his book, as well as one from USA Today. Mr. Obama, your Iran deal will fall apart. So we'll talk about this with Alan Dershowitz. A little bit later, take your phone calls right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
You know, when I was growing up, there were lots of talk about the new morality, and while that was true in the 1960s and 70s, ushering in a new morality, there is growing evidence that the most significant shift in moral attitudes is taking place right now. A study by the Barna Group confirms what I've been seeing among young people. Put simply, the younger you are, the more likely you are to be engaged in immoral behavior.
The survey looks at the behavior of 4 age groups: elders who are over the age of 62, boomers who are 44 to 62, busters who are 25 to 43, and mosaics who are 18 to 24. If you look at any immoral or questionable behavior, the percentage of those participating in those behaviors increases as you move from old to young. This would include such behaviors as watching pornography, using profanity in public, gambling, illicit sexual encounters, and getting drunk. George Bonner says we are witnessing the development and acceptance of a new moral code in America. He explains that mosaics have little exposure to traditional moral teaching and limited accountability for such behavior. The moral code began to disintegrate when the generation before them, the baby busters, pushed the limits that had been challenged by their parents, the baby boomers. You know, for years I've been saying that these 2 major shifts in morality took place for different reasons. When many baby boomers rejected traditional morality in the 1960s and 70s, they were doing it consciously. They knew they were crossing a line. But when the current generation engages in these behaviors, often they're not even aware that they are crossing a line. Most of them don't even know where the lines for traditional morality are. This survey should be an encouragement to both parents and youth leaders to take the time to instruct the current generation in biblical morality. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Prayer is a powerful weapon. From Provident Films and Affirm Films comes War Room in theaters August 28. Rated PG. More information at warroomthemovie.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
You heard us talk about the Iran deal, and we quoted from everybody from Colonel Alan West to Alan Dershowitz, and we had Colonel West in studio just recently, and now we have by phone certainly Alan Dershowitz, and on a lot of political issues they may disagree, but they all agree that this Iran deal is not a good idea. Let's, if we can, maybe get to this idea of whether it's a deal or a treaty, because it seems to me that if I read Article 2, Section 2 of the Constitution, these are treaties. And even in the Federalist Papers you talk about in this article in USA Today, Federalist Paper number 69, Alexander Hamilton made it pretty clear what a treaty is, and we've been calling this not a treaty, but it sure looks like one, isn't it?
Well, it looks like a treaty. It walks like a treaty. It quacks like a treaty. It's a treaty. And John Kerry, when he testified recently, was asked why he didn't submit it to the Senate as a treaty. And he basically said, well, we couldn't get it through if we submitted it as a treaty. He couldn't get it through if he submitted it as an executive legislative agreement. A majority of Congress is against it. A majority of both houses are against it. A majority of the American people are against it. And yet he thinks that it can be made an enforceable deal just by having the president plus 1/3 plus 1 of one house of Congress. That's just not the democratic way. Whether it's technically a treaty or not, and I think there's a strong argument that it is, it certainly is something that should be approved by the Senate without a filibuster, without the necessity for overruling a veto or a veto. That's just the way democracy should operate. And if Alexander Hamilton or James Madison were here today, they would tell you that this could not be done by the president alone.
I would say so. Well, okay, that brings us to what's called the Corker Bill. It's actually the Iran Nuclear Agreement Review Act of 2015, but we'll just call it the Corker Bill. And we have listeners from his home state, and they've talked about this before, but it is kind of convoluted in the sense that whereas you would require 2/3 to ratify a treaty in the Senate, now, as long as the president vetoes it, which he will, then you'd have to have 2/3 to override the veto. It just gets kind of confusing, doesn't it, in terms of what we have?
Yes, it gets very confusing, and it's very undemocratic. And to add to that, there's now a threat of a filibuster. that they won't even allow it to come to a vote. Now, that violates the spirit of this statute. This statute was a compromise, and it was designed to allow the Senate and the House to have their say. And if it's filibustered by a few Democrats in the Senate, that will undercut the will of the Senate. Remember, this is a bipartisan issue. Just today, Senator Menendez, a Democrat from New Jersey, came out against the bill, Senator Schumer. And it's interesting that Senator Menendez came out against it, because when Senator Schumer came out against it, the Internet was filled with horrible, racist, anti-Semitic, and bigoted claims. Oh, he's a Jew. He has dual loyalty. What does he care about? He's not really an American. All of that terrible, terrible nonsense. Now you have Senator Menendez, who's not Jewish, coming out against the bill. We have several African-American congressmen who've come out against the bill. This is a bipartisan opposition. I've spoken to a lot of Democrats who think this is a really bad deal, but they're afraid to come out against their president. And the New York Times had a terrible editorial in which it said, how dare any congressman or senator listen to a foreign leader rather than our commander-in-chief. Does the New York Times not know that President Obama is not your commander-in-chief? He's not my commander-in-chief. He's only the commander-in-chief of people in uniform. A president can't command us. This isn't an Ayatollah. He can't tell us what to do. He can't tell the Senate how to vote. And the senators should be listening to foreign leaders. I wish they listened to more foreign leaders when we went to war against Iraq and went to war in Vietnam. We should be listening to whoever has the best ideas. Senators and congressmen should be voting their conscience, not their party. And if they voted their conscience, there would be an overwhelming majority against this deal, enough to overcome the veto. But let's see if partisanship prevails over common sense.
You know, you mentioned Benjamin Netanyahu kind of in passing there. And I remember when he introduced you one time as being the greatest defender of Israel, which I thought was high praise from Benjamin Netanyahu. And again, there's been so much criticism about him speaking in Congress. And I've never thought that that was a major violation of protocol. Like you said, I want to get as much information and as much wisdom and discernment as possible when we are going to enter into something of this consequence, don't you think?
And remember that under our Constitution, the legislative branches are equal branches to the presidency. The presidency is no more important than the legislature. They're co-equal independent branches, and they have the right to invite whoever they want to invite. Winston Churchill spoke in front of Congress, essentially demanding that we get into the Second World War. We've had many, many leaders. The president sent Cameron to Congress to lobby in favor of this deal. You can't have it both ways. You can't say it's okay for foreign leaders to lobby in favor of the deal, but not to lobby against the deal. When we were getting into the Iraq War and the Vietnam War, there were foreign leaders who expressed opposition to it. And we should be listening to the best ideas. And in this case, the best idea is not to accept this deal. This deal is not good for America. It's not good for the Middle East. It's not good for peace. And, you know, you can see how weak the deal is when the president and his surrogates start attacking the messengers. They're calling us all warmongers, neocons. I mean, Senator Schumer and Senator Menendez and I are the White House's worst nightmares. We're liberal Democrats who generally support the president, who oppose the war, I did at least, in Iraq, and we're opposed to this deal, not because we have dual loyalty, but because we have great loyalty to America. President Obama himself opposed the war in Iraq. Does that make him disloyal? Does that make him have dual loyalty because he opposed the president of the United States? He may very well have been right, and I may very well be right when I'm opposing this deal with Iran. And so anybody who feels that the deal is bad should write to their senators, their congressmen, should demand that partisanship be put aside, and that Democrats who have doubts about the deal should vote against it. The president answers by saying, well, it may not be such a great deal, but it's better than the alternative. No, it's not. There are alternatives. One alternative, for example, is to hold the Iranians to their commitment in the deal.
Yes.
That says that they will never, ever, under any circumstances, try to obtain nuclear weapons. If we hold them to that deal and authorize the president to take military action to prevent them from getting nuclear weapons, we're a step closer to preventing them from doing it rather than just postponing this catastrophe for 10 or 12 or 8.5 years.
Let's see if we can talk about that, because you do that very well in terms of saying the what if question, both in your Newsweek article as well as in your book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. Because we're being told right now that if Congress rejects the deal, of course it might be filibuster, but let's just assume that they do, that the sanctions are going to go anyway. And I remember when John Kerry was on Face the Nation, that's basically said there'd be no restraints on Iran. So what do we do then if indeed Congress rejects the deal and there are no longer economic sanctions?
Well, first of all, there will be constraints because the Congress has constraints. They have sanctions. Congress can enact further sanctions. The United States can maintain its sanctions. It's true that China and Russia and France and Germany and England probably won't maintain their sanctions, but also we can put the military option on the table. The President of the United States should be telling the Iranians, look, you committed not to develop nuclear weapons. We hold you to your word. If you move toward the development of nuclear weapons, we're not going to go to war with you. We're not going to occupy you. We're not going to send troops on the ground. We have the capability through our missiles, through our drones, through our Air Force to destroy your nuclear capacity, your capacity to develop nuclear weapons, and we will do it. And if you rebuild it, we will do it again. And if you rebuild it, we will do it again. When Israel attacked the Osirak nuclear reactor in Iraq, everybody said, oh, they'll just rebuild. No, they never rebuilt. When Israel attacked the Syrian nuclear reactor and destroyed it from North Korea, they said, oh, they'll just rebuild. No, they didn't rebuild, because they knew that if they try to rebuild, it would happen again and again and again. There's nothing more important than preventing Iran from getting nuclear weapons. Iran is a country that would kill Americans if it could. And if you give them $150 billion and nuclear weapons, they will bring the war to our shores. They will bring the war to our soldiers. They've already said that if they bomb Tel Aviv, they will kill 3 to 5 million Jews, and Israel's a one-bomb state. And if Israel retaliates and kills 10 to 20 million Muslims, it's no big deal because there are so many more Muslims in the world. If you have leaders making those kinds of irresponsible statements, you cannot trust them with nuclear weapons.
Let's take a break, and when we come back, we might get some phone calls a little bit later, but I do want to kind of pursue a little bit more about some of those military options, regime change, and the rest, and then also this idea of what you call a variation on Hobson's choice, call it Obama's choice. So we'll take a break, and when we come back, continue our conversation with Alan Dershowitz. First of all, if you wanted some more information about this and wanted to contact your members of Congress, we always make it possible for you to take action, and we will probably put a take action item up there in the future, but this would be a great way for you to collect some of these articles that we have already posted on the website. The Case Against the Iran Deal and Mr. Obama, Your Iran Deal Will Fall Apart, one from Newsweek, the other from USA Today. And then, of course, we also have the book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran, and that is available both in Kindle and in paperback, and we have a link there for you as well. So take some of that information. You might even want to download the podcast, send it to others so that they could hear from Alan Dershowitz as well. Let's take a break. We'll come back with more right after these important messages.
Imagine you're in a room with 99 other people, 100 of you total. All of you listen to Point of View. You have that in common. What you don't have in common is that only one of you, actually less than 1 in 100, has ever supported the work of Point of View. That's what a recent study showed. 1 in 100, fewer than 1% have given, 99% have not. You listen, so I know you appreciate what this program provides. Now, I invite you to move from the big group to the little one. If 1/3, 33% of those listening gives just $5 this week, we could fully fund Point of View for a year, 12 months. Not everyone will, not everyone can, but can you give $5 today, or maybe $55 or $105? Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net, pointofview.net, or send your gift to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Join the few, the thankful. Support Point of View. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Continue our conversation today with Alan Dershowitz. His book is entitled The Case Against the Deal with Iran. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Georgia first. Frank, what would you like to say?
Yeah, first of all, I want to say that Obama, he is doing just what the Muslim does. He sits there and tells you one thing and turn around and does another. For instance, he says, if Syria uses chemical weapons, we're going to go fight them. That's a lie. Everything he can possibly do to bring America down, he is doing it. It starts off from him coming off saying there's going to be no taxes and we got Obamacare. His main goal is to bring America down and destroy America, and everybody keeps saying, you know, does he know what he's doing? He knows exactly what he's doing. For the simple fact is, if he's got a TV, he can hear them over saying they're going to destroy the U.S., they're going to destroy Israel. But yet, not only does he give them back their nuclear weapons, he gives them billions of dollars on top of it.
Okay, let's get into that for just a minute. First of all, you have a section here, President Obama is neither anti-Israel nor anti-Semitic. But what about this issue of if indeed these sanctions are lifted, lots of money, and we know it's billions of dollars, go in the hands of Iran and then end up in the hands of, I don't know, Hamas, Hezbollah, who knows where it all ends up. But that's a real concern, isn't it?
Oh, it's a deep, deep concern. I will not get personal over this. I don't want to be attacking individuals. I want to attack ideas. And I think we ought to have a great debate, Lincoln-Douglas type debates. This is the most important foreign policy decision of my adult life. Why are we not having great debates on television? Why are we just having debates between 17 Republican candidates, most of whom will never really run for president? We ought to be having great Lincoln-Douglas type debates, and I challenge the administration to put forth their strongest proponent to the deal. Let's go on national television, national radio, one-on-one, two-on-two, and let the public decide. This is something the public ought to be deciding. It's a great clash of ideas, and we shouldn't get personal about it. They shouldn't get personal about it. They shouldn't be calling us warmongers or supporters of the Iraq War or dual loyalty or anything like that. Let's forget about the name-calling on both sides, and let's get a great debate on this idea, on this plan, on this deal. And I think the American public will be overwhelmingly against the deal when they know $150 billion are going toward Hezbollah, which killed American Marines, toward helping the Iranians give improvised explosive devices to America's enemies that kill American soldiers, that will be used against America's allies in the Middle East. Americans will be overwhelmingly opposed to this deal if both sides are heard, and that's why the administration doesn't want to have debates.
Frank raised a good question too. You know, this is a president's drawn a line, and then the line is crossed, and so in your book you ask this very good question: what will President Obama do if Iran is caught cheating on this deal during his administration? And I think Frank would say, and maybe I would say as well, nothing.
I think that's right. That's my great fear. And the important thing is not so much what Obama would do; it's what the Iranians believe Obama would do. George Washington once told us that the best way to make sure we have peace is to make sure our enemy believes that we're ready for war. And what Obama did, and it was a terrible thing to do, is he took the military option off the table during the negotiations. And even Tom Friedman, a very strong supporter of Obama and a supporter of the deal, said that that was a terrible mistake, and that's what allowed the Iranians to negotiate with us as equals. And we ended up playing checkers against the people who invented chess, and their Ayatollah checkmated us and put us in a position where we're playing Russian roulette. Now, in Russian roulette, only a 1 in 6 chance you're going to get your head blown off, but none of us would voluntarily play Russian roulette. And yet there's more than a 1 in 6 chance that Iran will develop nuclear weapons under this deal. I think it's better than 50%. I think it's probably more like 70 or 80%. And that has to be stopped, and that's why this should be an issue in the next presidential campaign. I want to hear what all the candidates have to say about this deal and about whether it means that Iran will be allowed, with American complicity and American financial aid, to develop nuclear weapons in 10 years. That would be a disaster for the world.
Let's, if we can, since you mentioned Thomas Friedman, go into a little more detail on this idea of your military options, because as you pointed out in passing, but I want people to understand this, because we always have this kind of false choice that is given to us as president. If we don't do anything, then this happens. If we don't pass it, this happens. Or we go to war, and it's always the extreme example. But you just said in passing that you don't, or you're not talking about putting boots on the ground, but you and Thomas Friedman, who are not exactly people I would call warmongers, are nevertheless saying there is a military option, and we shouldn't just leave it to Israel to use a military option. There are things that the United States can do. Please explain, if you might.
Well, the United States has bunker-busting bombs, ordinances that can penetrate into every hiding place and every mountain that they use to develop their nuclear weapons. Israel at the moment doesn't have that. Israel has a small, relatively small Air Force, which is designed to protect it from local threats. It doesn't have the kind of long-range missiles and long-range air capabilities that the United States has. Look, my hope is that neither Israel nor the United States would ever have to use the military option, but the Iranians have to believe it's on the table, and they have to believe that if they cross red lines, there will be consequences. And, of course, we know that President Obama has allowed numerous red lines to be crossed. The Syrian ones is an example. The other one, he said 24/7 inspection. Instead, we got 24-day inspection. Look, I'm a criminal lawyer. If I have an innocent defendant and the police come to his house and say, we want to search, I say, do it now, immediately, no delays. I don't want anybody to think we're hiding anything. But if I have a guilty client, you want delay.
Yes.
There's only one reason Iran wants 24 days. They're going to cheat. They know they're going to cheat. They're planning to cheat, and they're planning to circumvent our inspection by the 24-day period.
Just before I take another phone call, you know, we talk about the Hobson's choice sometimes when we talk about logic or philosophy of law. But you talk about this idea of Obama's choice. We sort of backed into a corner, haven't we?
We have. The president's told us, essentially, look, there's no alternative to this deal because the sanctions are already gone, the sanction regime's gone, the military options are off the table, and if we back out of this deal, Iran will develop nuclear weapons. No, that's just not right. If we back away from this deal and maintain our military option, maintain the sanctions that the United States can impose, remember, we're the strongest economy in the world, and we can still have sanctions not only against Iran, but against anyone that violates our sanction regime. I do not think the French want to start being sanctioned by America and saying that anybody who has any dealings with Iran will not be able to do business with the United States. We are still the powerful superpower economically and militarily, and we should not be giving up that leverage. That's negotiation 101, and the president failed that course. He doesn't understand how to negotiate. I wouldn't allow this president, who I like as a person, this Secretary of State, who I've known for years, I wouldn't allow them to negotiate a 1-month lease for me. These guys do not know how to use their strength to negotiate a good deal.
That's incredible. Let's take a real quick phone call before we take a break. Benjamin, I think you had a question of Alan Dershowitz. Go for it.
Yes, I have a question. I appreciate taking my call. I just have a question for Professor. Sure. If you knew President Obama, where he's standing in our foreign policy, where he's standing on Israel and all these things, why did he vote for him second time?
It's a good question.
Yeah, okay.
It's a good question. Look, I'm a Democrat, and my feeling is that issues like foreign policy in Israel should be bipartisan. And I see my role as remaining within the Democratic Party and trying to put as much pressure as I can on my party to do the right thing. By voting for him, I get an opportunity to try to persuade him, to meet with him, and to try to use whatever influence that I may have intellectually, morally, in every other way. And that's the way I think American politics generally works. I'm not promising that I'll vote for every Democratic candidate always. I voted for a Republican when he ran for governor of Massachusetts, Bill Weld. But I generally am a liberal Democrat, and I generally support Obama's policies domestically, not every one of them, and that's why I voted for him. Please don't ask me the hard question, because I don't know the answer to that. If I had that vote to do again today, would I today vote for him? I don't know the answer to that question. That's a very, very hard question. And it's not obvious to me that I would today vote against Romney and for President Obama if I knew then what I knew now. But one of the problems is he told me in no uncertain terms that he would never allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons. He looked me in the eye and told me that. And I'm very disappointed in his change of policy.
Well, again, let's take a break. We'll come back and maybe get into one more phone call if we can, but I did want to give some of you a chance to ask a question of Alan Dershowitz. And again, if you're just joining us, again, his book is one that you really want to get a copy of, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. We have information about it on our website, pointofview.net, a place where it links to you. Of course, you can find it probably in a lot of places, but we have a way that you could get it in Kindle or, of course, as paperback. I've posted a couple articles, the one from Newsweek, The Case Against the Iran Deal, and one from USA Today, Mr. Obama, your Iran deal will fall apart. So those resources are on the website. We'll continue our conversation with Alan Dershowitz right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. If you'd like to join us, 1-800-351-1212. The Case Against the Deal with Iran has some sections on the military option and then a number of columns over the years that Alan Dershowitz has written, first in the President Obama's first term and then second term, then a section here closing the deal, which it has some things about the president is not the commander-in-chief of foreign policy. Obama is neither anti-Israel or anti-Semitic, something we got into just a minute ago. And just before I take another phone call, Alan Dershowitz, let me, if I can, help you give us some marching orders we not only have listeners, we have activists that listen to this program. And, when a while back when Benjamin Netanyahu was going to speak, I think almost all of our listeners contacted their member of Congress saying he should be allowed to speak. And even recently with these Planned Parenthood videos, they've contacted Congress. Well, talk about for just a minute what our people might want to say to their elected representatives about this Iran deal.
First of all, don't let anybody cow you into not trying to petition your government for a redress of grievances. The First Amendment was written to give you, everybody out there, every listener, the absolute right to try to get the government to change its policy, to oppose the president, and so please do that. And I think what you have to ask these folks when they're particularly Democrats, are you placing your loyalty to party over your commitment to principle? Because the American people are opposed to this. Democrats are not strongly supportive of it, even as a party. And it's not a good deal for America. It's not a good deal for our allies. It's not a good deal for American strength and power in the world. And we have to come up with a better alternative. And this deal doesn't prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons. It legitimates Iran getting nuclear weapons, and that's what we have to stop. And so, at the very least, you want your congressman to support a resolution that says that Iran will never, under any circumstances, be allowed to develop nuclear weapons, and the president has the authority to stop that from happening. But even better, just oppose the deal. The president's wrong when he says that opposing this deal is worse than accepting this deal. It's a bad deal. We should reject the bad deal. We should not support it just because the president says that the alternative of rejecting it is worse. And I think that your congressmen, your senators will listen to you. They want to know what you think about this. So please call them, write them, send them a copy of the book if you can do that, and use whatever influence you have. This is a democracy, and a deal should not be allowed to go through over the strong objection of Americans and their elected representatives in Congress.
Let's take some more phone calls. We'll go to WLPE. Jack, you're on with Alan Dershowitz.
Yes, so, I've followed President Obama very closely, and my impression is that he does know exactly what he's doing, and that's very worrisome that this particular deal seems to be a bad deal, and maybe perhaps he knows it. But my next question is, Hillary Clinton, what is her position? What would her position be, or what is it? Because I haven't heard it on this particular deal. And for Dr. Dershowitz, if Hillary Clinton has the same approach, would you support her, or would you even campaign against her, perhaps?
It's a very fair question. It's a very good question. I was actually with Hillary Clinton 2 days ago on Sunday. I had a few minutes alone with her. I gave her a copy of an article I had written against the deal. I asked her to seriously consider it and asked her to tell me ultimately what her position would be if she were elected president, and the deal went through. What would she do? Would she take the position that the deal prevents Iran from ever developing nuclear weapons? These are all important considerations in my decision who to support in this 2016 election. It's much too early for me to take a position on that. I've known Hillary Clinton for many, many years. I like her as a person. I am a Democrat, but my vote cannot be taken for granted. I will vote for, support, campaign for those people who I think are best for America, best for world peace, best for our allies, and I will vote against and campaign against anybody who I think is undercutting American power, American prestige, American strength, and America's ability to do good things for the world. And one of the best things America could do for the world would be to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons.
I agree. Let's take one more phone call real quickly. Nick in Missouri. Your comments real quick?
Yes, sir. My comment would be, what kind of legacy would the president have to look back on when this deal falls through? And he'll be dodging that question for many years.
Well, I think it will be the legacy of Chamberlain. Chamberlain was a great Chancellor of the Exchequer and a very good Prime Minister who brought health care to Britain, but he'll always be remembered as somebody who failed to recognize the greatest evil of the 20th century, namely Hitler and Nazism. And I think if President Obama allows Iran to develop nuclear weapons, and that results in a catastrophic situation, much like what resulted from the deal that Chamberlain made with Hitler in 1938, that will tragically be his legacy. I wrote that as a friend in the Wall Street Journal several years ago, warning President Obama that he could end up with the legacy of Neville Chamberlain. He doesn't want that to happen. He doesn't believe this deal will lead to that legacy, but I think he's wrong, tragically, and I hope that he sees that before his term is over and understands that he will be responsible. He said that on a television program. He says, if this deal falls apart 5 years from now, they're going to point a finger at me. That's right, Mr. President, and don't let this deal go through because it will fall through. They're going to cheat. That's why they want 24 days to move around material. They're going to be developing nuclear weapons, whether it be in 5 years and 8 years, in 10 years or 12 years, and the president who signed the deal will be responsible. That will be his legacy.
Professor Alan Dershowitz has been with us. We've talked with him in the past about some of the other books that he has been a part of, Terror Tunnels, as well as, of course, the book coming out that we're going to be looking forward to, The World's First, but certainly not last, Jewish Lawyer. And, of course, today we've been talking about his recent book and the one that you can find out more about on our website, pointofview.net, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. Thank you so very much for giving us an hour today here on Point of View.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
We've had him on before. Have him on again. Might talk about Abraham. So again, let me encourage you to get some of the resources that we have been talking about here today, and I'll go through them one more time because I know sometimes people tune in and tune out about the program. And the first, of course, is the book, The Case Against the Deal with Iran. I really think this is a very important issue, and as he said, perhaps the greatest threat in the 21st century. The greatest threat, Mr. President and John Kerry, it's not climate change. The greatest threat is an Iranian nuclear war that will develop, no doubt, when they have nuclear arms. And what does that mean? And what kind of influence will that have in the Middle East? What kind of impact could that have in Israel? What kind of impact could it have on us? It's something that certainly deserves our time and attention. That's why we've focused some time and attention on it today here on Point of View. We have a couple of articles, one that came out in Newsweek, and we have posted it on the website, so you can print it out and read it and pass it on to others. The Case Against the Iran Deal. Pretty good summary, but that only gives you kind of a quick overview. To get into the details with all the footnotes, the book, of course, is available, The Case Against the Deal with Iran, and then a shorter piece which kind of gets into the constitutional issues a little bit by Alan Dershowitz, Mr. Obama, Your Iran Deal Will Fall Apart. Lots to cover. We did our best to cover it in an hour today, and I hope that you will take the time to use these resources, and most importantly, take the time maybe to pass it on to others, either one of these articles or perhaps even the podcast, and say, you really need to listen to this. This is an important issue, and that's why we cover those things that affect your faith, your family, or your freedom. You can find all that on our website, pointofview.net. You can find out more about some of the other resources that we make available to you on a fairly regular basis. And so please take the time to go to the website, pointofview.net, and download the viewpoints, download the podcast, download some of the articles, and be effective in what you do in your community. I want to thank Andrew, Catherine, and Chris for their help behind the scenes. Have a great day. See you back here tomorrow.
If you've been a Christian for any length of time, no doubt you've heard about Jesus feeding thousands with a few loaves of bread and a couple of fish. Jesus took something small and turned it into something big. Recently, someone here at Point of View made an interesting discovery. He did some math and figured out that according to the number of faithful listeners we have, if you and every other listener gave $5, it would help Kerby and the team bring you interviews and commentary for not 3 months, but 3 years. You heard me right. If every listener donates just $5, we'd pay what it costs to bring you this needed information for 3 years. And if you urge a friend to join you, you send $5, they send $5, well, you can imagine the impact. Click the Donate Now button at pointofview.net. pointofview.net, or send $5 to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Send $5. Urge a friend to join you. Support Point of View. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.